Indeed. Good afternoon. Welcome to Asghar Bukhari School in Bristol. I'm Nicky Campbell. This is The Big Questions. The killing of drummer Lee Rigby shocked the entire nation this week. How could such an atrocious act be carried out in God's, or rather Allah's, name? Our first big question: have British Muslims done enough to counter extremism? A competitive market in tax rates seems to be developing, not for the little people, but for the corporate giants that bestride the globe. Our next big question: is tax avoidance immoral? Welcome everybody to The Big Questions this morning. Well, Michael Adebolajo and Michael Adebolawe, the two suspects for the killing of Lee Rigby, were both brought up in Christian families. It's known that Adebolajo converted to Islam in 2003 after 9/11 and the invasion of Iraq. He was tutored by the infamous hate preacher Omar Bakri Muhammad, who recalls Michael asking questions about when violence was justified. Now, despite billions of taxpayers' money being spent on counter-terrorism strategies since then, much of it aimed at Britain's Muslim communities, radicalisation continues here and now. Have British Muslims done enough to counter extremism? Well, Julie Siddiqui, there are apparently 2,000 names of interest on the list of the authorities. What should be done by Muslim communities? Is enough being done? What more can be done?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to obviously say is that our thoughts and prayers go to, Lee Rigby's family and friends, and also the people of Woolwich that had to witness such a horrific attack in a way that, I think none of us would have ever expected.
That press conference really brought it home by the family.
I mean, it's just been heartbreaking every level. Actually hearing it unfold on the radio and then on the news, and it was just shock and disbelief really that something like that could happen in such an open way. I think the question about what work has been done, what more needs to be done, is a big question, which is why we're here. And I think there's no easy answer. I think it's a fair question. I think it's interesting that the question, most of us are answering the question are Muslim today. And actually, I think there's a question there that, the issue around extremism and what is extremism. And, I feel I'm seeing extremism on the streets of various different towns and cities up and down the country in the last few nights, of people being attacked, etc. But having said all of that, I think a lot of work has been done. If we're comparing it to maybe 2005 and since then, a lot of mistakes have been made. But I think, seeing something as we have on the streets of London, clearly none of us can be complacent, and there's a lot more scope to do a lot more work. But I think some good relations.
What more work, though? I mean, what actually needs to be done? Can you be a bit specific about what people should be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not an easy one, and I think that a lot of the work around, bringing people together, actually talking about this issue is complex. It's not easy. It's not a black and white issue. Some people have tried to make it a black and white issue, and it clearly isn't a black and white issue at all. But I think in terms of, if once we start to understand and start to see emerging the story behind these two people that they've been associating with, the kinds of things that they're being taught, clearly more needs to be done in terms of discussion about that once we start to get underneath some of that.
You're looking, Asghar Bukhari from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, you're looking a bit sceptical.
I am sceptical. It is black and white. It's only both the government and the Muslim institutions, not the Muslim people. I can't blame them, but Muslim institutions, the organisations that should be out there doing something. Both of them make it more complicated than it is, both mainly to cover the fact that they're not doing anything at all. It's very simple. Teach young Muslim children that the anger they feel at the oppression around the world, across the Muslim world, is easily tackled peacefully and democratically. Teach them the way Martin Luther King taught black people that they could make a change within society and bring about the policies that they want, an ethical foreign policy, without killing anyone. And Muslim institutions, not the people, have failed to do that. They've washed their hands on their own youth.
So in the impact statement after the atrocity, when it said, by apologising in such a stupid way, these pathetic Muslims are reinforcing the enemy's narrative. What does that mean?
That simply means that Islamophobic, Muslim-hating organisations that are out there are claiming it's Islam that is to blame. So they are saying that the reason why they've taken this violent action is because it's an Islamic obligation upon them. The fact of the matter is...
who are the pathetic Muslims?
Muslim institutions that are coming out apologising and saying it's not foreign policy.
Julie Siddiqui, do you understand this anger that he has?
No, I mean, I think, you know, the difficulty with someone like Asghar, or speaking, you know, specifically, and he has said this, and he's talking about me, he says individuals and Muslims, but Muslims form in organisations and institutions, and to just blanketly put down everybody for doing nothing for the last 10 years. You know, I think it's just really unhelpful. You know, I'd rather he sat and worked. I'd rather he actually worked with people.
I am working.
I'd rather you actually sat and worked with people like me, rather than just sit on the sit on the fringes behind your lap.
I'm not working on the fringes.
Rather than sit on the fringes and work on your...
I'm working to try to teach young Muslims the democratic values that organisations like yourself are failing to do it. Perhaps when you do it, then you can come and complain. Now, just saying, I know that you might say, we need to get involved in democracy. They don't believe that works. Teach them it. And the mosques that are failing young Muslims to teach them democratic values, teach them it, and stop covering for them.
Andrew Mansour, you're an imam. Are you teaching democratic values?
I am, of course, all the time. Asghar has written about me actually teaching that in the last election when I stood. I stood in the parliamentary election. I'm not just teaching it, I'm actually practicing it. I think Asghar also was talking about me, because I was apologising for what has happened. What we want to do is...
Why were you apologising?
Hold on, we need to make it very clear. The loss of a life, Lee Rigby's life, is wrong. Whoever has done it is criminal. And the loss of a life, of course we must be sorry for. Of course we must say to the family, our heart goes out to you, because we think it's something that is vile, especially when those people who have done it, they've claimed to be, that they're doing it in the name of God. There is no God in murder. They've claimed that to be an Islamic act. There is nothing Islamic about it. And worst of all is they've done it in the name of Muslims. No Muslims would support their vile act.
Why are they doing it?
So I'm saying, hold on, Asghar, I'll come back to you in a second. So my point is, we need to apologise to the world at large to say, these people have held Islam, hijacked it, they're abusing an Islamic God, and they're attacking all of us. That's the first point. Secondly, why are they doing it? There are lots of reasons. Foreign policy is one of them, of course. Nobody's denying that. But there is also deprivation, there is also discrimination, there is also underachievement, there is also poverty. There are a whole host of social issues. We need to do everything.
He was not deprived.
We need to do everything together to be able to deal with it. And number three, we need to do it together. It's not about Muslims only. It's Muslims and non-Muslims together. Last 10 years, Nikki, we've been talking about Muslims need to sort their home out as soon as possible. 10 years, it hasn't worked. That means we've got that narrative wrong. It's about Muslims, non-Muslims. Christians, Sikhs, Jews, people of all faith and no faith, coming together and saying, England is our home, and we're going to sort it out together.
So please. These young men who have lost their way, how can you persuade, how can any of us persuade them? They're less likely to listen to me than they are to you. Well, but how can anyone persuade them that there is a platform, there is a way, there is a method of expressing their discontents, whatever they may be?
Well, since 9/11, I've spent my life arguing for the importance of this space, a democratic space, where we can talk about the difficult issues. If you have a problem with foreign policy, we live in a free country. The anti-war movement, I believe, has been a great buttress to the argument of the extremists who wanted to hijack legitimate grievances, but they actually wanted to hijack it for their own evil aims, because they do want to clash. We cannot be in denial of that. And the fact is, in this country, the majority of people are against the wars in Afghanistan, and indeed the war that happened in Iraq.
But they don't want to attack somebody in the street in this brutal way as a result of those wars.
Exactly, that's my point, that we have the space to express it. Unfortunately, because the politicians who took our country to war don't like to make the link between foreign policy and awful atrocities here at home, they want to say it's nothing to do with politics. It is something to do with politics. But at the same time, as a Muslim, I do feel the need to distance myself. I don't, it's not a pleasant thing to have to do. When a paedophile acts, they're not from a certain background, all the communities don't feel they have to come out and apologise or condemn. But I acknowledge that people are fearful, people are feeling scared, and I think it's part of genuine humanity to reach out, acknowledge where each other's hearts are at, and to do that, we feel the genuine compassion for Lee Rigby's family. It was awful, it was disgusting, and it's not about trying to hijack that to make political points. I mean, I don't know what was in the minds of those people.
They know, they said it clearly.
Yes, the security services said our country will not be more safe.
No, the murderers, the terrorists themselves said very clearly why they did the killing. They said they did it in their own words, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You will never find peace until we find peace. And when a brave English woman challenged them to stop their
barbarism, they said, I'm sorry you have to see this, but women and children are dying in their lands, or our lands, as he put it.
And
no one's justifying it, but it's explaining it. That's how you stop it.
How are you going to, Asghar?
Do you want me to answer how you're going to stop it?
Yeah, how are you going to stop it?
By institutions, the thousands of mosques in this country, the pathetic, cowardly mosque leaders teaching and educating young Muslim children that there is a peaceful, democratic way. The suffragettes did it. Martin Luther King did it. Why can't we do it?
We would agree with you entirely from the 2001 narrative. By 2013, from my experience of running up and down the country as an imam, I go to various mosques, leading prayers, talking and discussing. I haven't had a single weekend where I've not gone to an area to talk about these issues, to tell people that Britain is our home, British people are our people, we care about this country. Look, this is a very important narrative we need to create. Salma's point, I'll give you an example. This morning I received an email that came from Birmingham. An Asian man was brutally murdered by some racist thugs. Yes. His body will be released in the next few days. The families asked me if I would be kind enough to go to the funeral prayer and address the crowd and condemn the violent attack. Of course I would. I would say the
Mohammed
EDL
Salim
are nasty.
Chaudhry, the gentleman's name.
Of course, EDL are nasty pieces of work, BNP are racist. We need to stand up to them. And the interesting commonality between EDL, BNP, and the extremist thugs who have murdered Lee is the same. The commonality is they all want to derail.
There's no evidence they have anything to do with this.
Of course,
murder.
but we need to create a common narrative, and that is they share one platform, and that is they're extreme in their views. And we need to tackle those extremism head on. Racism as well as extremism, all of them form part of the same problem and narrative that is causing the biggest trouble today.
I'd like to say, as a Birmingham Muslim, you know, we are not in any denial about the extremists. People have come out day in, day out. 300 organisations, you know, mosques, madrasas, women's groups, young people's groups, have openly said people like Anjum Chowdhury are not welcome in Birmingham. Whether legally he's able to get away with what he says or not, the fact is people have been challenging them. They're not allowed in the mosques. The fact is they're not given that platform.
Someone being unfair.
No, the fact is, the reality is,
not good enough.
people like Anjum Chowdhury do come to try and divide. They do have a message of hate. And the reality is, Birmingham Muslims and British Muslims up and down this country have been challenging them. I actually had a meeting with the counter-terrorism police and said openly, generally, a month ago even, and said, what is it that you think we could be doing, should be doing, that we're not doing? Because I don't want to see in the streets of Britain any violence.
And they said?
And I didn't get any answer, because the fact is we are doing all of these things. I'm open to it. People, because nobody gains from this violence apart from the extremists. As a British Muslim...
On both sides.
Yes, but as a British Muslim, we're vulnerable both ways. As citizens, we're not bomb-proof when these extremists want to carry out violence. Our kids, you know, have the same vulnerabilities as everybody else. And then when awful things happen, we as a community are pointed at as a collective. And now we're seeing it.
Yeah,
we're seeing the attacks on mosques.
Taj
so there is no vested interest in being complacent about it.
What some people still don't get, and some people watching this still don't get, is why these young men who were, you know, British Nigerians, these suspects, and this happens in so many other cases as well, they feel more affinity with people from lands to which they've never visited, they've never been, than they do with their fellow citizens. Why more affinity with co-religionists in far-off lands and people who live around the corner? Why is that?
Before I answer that, I think we need to...
Please answer that first.
No, and I think we need to call a spade a spade. The thing is, we had no Muslim terrorism in this country until we had an illegal war in Iraq. And we need to understand that, and we need to... we need to acknowledge that. That doesn't justify what happened in 7/7.
That relates to my question.
Yeah. So, but the point is, how did these people become radicalized? I mean, I believe there's a mood music out there, and the mood music is to do with the 3M, and it's nothing to do with Minnesota mining and manufacturing. It's got to do with, and if you give me time briefly, it's got to do with the mullahs. It's got to do with the mosques. It's going to do with the madrasas, and I'll explain very briefly. The mullahs are the preachers, the orators, the speakers that goes around. And their world vision is what? There is a them and us. There is a boat of war, there's a boat of peace. And there's a whole notion of, you know, Muslims are going to heaven and everyone else is going to hell. This then is translated in some mosques, and many mosques actually, giving them the pulpit or giving them a meeting space. And then most mosques have these supplementary schools, these madrasas. And so these please, I didn't interrupt you. I did not interrupt you. I didn't interrupt you either.
Ridiculous.
Okay, so now let me finish my point, please.
It's not going down well.
No, so what? The truth is always bitter. The truth is always bitter.
Oh,
The truth is
okay.
always bitter.
Well, after it's finished, then we can discuss it.
Yeah,
Go
the
on,
truth is
Taj.
always bitter. And the madrasas, they're being instilled by this conditioning and brainwashing that's coming from where? Coming from the mullahs, coming from the mosque. And they believe, the children are raised to believe that they are better than others. There is a them and us narrative. And when there's a them and not an us, how many Muslims are actually fully integrated in this society? Not very many. Most of them, they still have one foot out there. They bring the cultural baggage from Pakistan or from Wahhabi land or wherever, and they want to bring it here. You can't impose Bombay Islam into Birmingham. It doesn't work. You know, what we have to do is have a British Islam that is rooted in this society, that's relevant to this society.
Well, okay.
Thankfully, some of us have been working week in, week out.
Not what Asghar is saying.
Month in, month out.
Let me come to Matthew. Matthew's done a lot of research.
With each other.
Julie, you've done a lot of research. It's in the papers today, research that you've been involved with, isn't it, through YouGov? Yeah. Some interesting results there as well. I mean, do people, generally the British population as a whole, do they believe that Muslim communities are well integrated in our society?
Well, the results were interesting because in the 3 days after Woolwich, we saw this backlash in terms of attacks or damage, I think, against 9 mosques, around 160 incidents of anti-Muslim prejudice, and we expected that to trickle into public opinion towards Islam. Actually, the picture's more positive than some of the newspapers would have us believe, especially among the young. And just to be clear, the vast majority of Muslims in this country subscribe to national identity, share our values, pledge allegiance to the democratic system as such, and the sort of view that is expressed by some, particularly on the far right, but also in sections of our tabloid newspapers, that the Leveson inquiry was good to pick up on. They push the opposite view, that Muslims are threatening, they're problematic, that this is somehow symbolic of a broader threat that British society is facing, and that actually is not reflected in the evidence, it's not reflected in the data.
What about, there was one figure in the data today, or in the poll today, that 18 to 24-year-olds, 38% of 18 to 24-year-olds say that Muslims are compatible with the British way of life. Is that not worryingly low?
Well,
18 to 24-year-olds.
Just to be clear, there's a very, very sharp generational divide in Britain today. And Britain's going through a generational drift.
That's better than the older generation.
The over 60s consistently on issues like immigration and their views towards Islam are increasingly and especially hostile on those issues. The young, who have grown up amidst immigration, amidst rising diversity, are far more accepting and at ease
4 out of 10, just.
with diversity. Yeah, it's not great, and there are challenges. There are challenges that remain. But the question for today was, can Muslims do more? And the answer is, we can all do. Sorry, who's not integrated?
The majority, only 38%, feels that.
It's a perception, and you've got to ask, where's that coming from? And I would say, what about sections of the irresponsible British media who are constantly fueling a particular image? Or what about
the messenger? You can't just blame the messenger. I mean, there is a problem that Muslims are not fully integrated, and you can cut it, splice it, and spice it, and dice it as you wish, but the reality is that. I mean,
actually,
people don't feel fully integrated in the society because they still think somehow they're going to go back to their homeland.
One second. Sorry, Julie. Jonathan, you've been trying to come in for quite some time. Jonathan Ecclesia.
On Thursday, I went down to my local mosque in Streatham, at the Hydra Islamic Centre. They immediately organised a public meeting. I went along to find out and listen to Muslims. They actually invited me up onto the platform, and I ended up having a debate. And I heard these issues and this debate being rehearsed there. And one of the messages that came across loud and clear was they are constantly trying to get out there with their message of love, with their message of peace and reconciliation and justice. But they can't get airspace to do it. And I think if over the last 6 months we've been giving more time on the BBC, in the media, to those kinds of voices rather than people like UKIP, I think the world will be a much better place right now.
Well, UKIP, you see, the problem is, UKIP have a considerable electoral support, which in a democracy you have to acknowledge.
And
now, Anjem Chaudhry is another issue, perhaps.
But wait, Nick, it's a problem with political debate, because what we're seeing is a shift right across the board where small minorities are then being superimposed on whole communities, and we're stereotyping whole communities. It's happening with the government over disability. We've seen a rise in disability hate crime because of the way the government's treating the disabled. We're seeing it right across a whole range of issues, and this is happening classically. We're reaping what we sow.
Gentleman in the back, just Sam, if I can, you had your hand up. Make a quick point, sir.
I'm from Setam. What the guy is talking about, I believe that. Because of Setam, we've been trying so many years to bring the Muslim people together in Setam. But the mayor of London Mayor don't give us the ability for us to do it. The British people don't give us chance to do that kind of thing, to bring the youngsters together, to give them the democratic way of living as a Muslim.
Within a democracy,
yeah, because of the mayor is not giving any. Excuse me, can I
most
finish?
mosques in this country,
Can I finish,
and most Muslims will know this, whether they say it in public or not.
No,
if you go into a mosque and say, look, I want to talk about political issues and learn about the democratic way, they will say, no politics in the mosque, get out. That's their most famous,
yes,
words.
Sir, is that the case in your experience?
That's not the case. The case is the ignorant people who don't give the ability for us, the leaders of the Muslim society, to do what they have to do. They don't give them no chance for them to do anything.
They're doing nothing.
What, do you want money? Do you want funding?
Not the funding and part of space. Because we need a space, then we can get...
What, another
because the madrasas, they're doing a good job. Because so many youths in this country, there was an alcoholic, some are drug addict.
Okay,
but the
thank you, sir.
put them into the right way.
Thank you, sir. What about this whole issue of... I mean, you've debated... Anjem Chaudhry's been on this programme, and his people have been on this programme. On one occasion, you see, the slight danger is perhaps one of his people... Another debate on the big questions that particular week was about football, and one of Anjem Chaudhry's people said, but it's too much flesh is shown, and they would ban football, but they could use the football stadia as places for public punishments under their... Now, we laugh, and it's ridiculous. But the thing is, is there a danger that people at home think that's what Muslims think?
Yes, there is. And actually, a lot of what we're talking about here is about perception. So as we've just heard, the statistics that we're hearing about perception, actually the statistics in terms of reality for Muslims is that they actually feel more at home here, more British, more part and parcel of wanting to be part and parcel of this country. And I would honestly say that our organisation, in the last 4 days, we've been absolutely overwhelmed by that middle majority of this country, the good people of this country who've come together, and they want to come together, and are reaching out to the mosques and are coming into these areas. I've had emails saying, we want to come to the mosque and reach out to you, because they see that perception is one thing and reality is something very, very different.
English people, but what are the mosques doing in return? Are they refusing to even let these English people in? Why do they not hold... Just a simple question, just a simple question. Let me answer this one question. There's approximately 3,000 mosques in this country. Why could they not do a single open day across the country where non-Muslims can come in? Let me finish. Don't tell me an aberration. Don't tell me the exception.
There was an open day at East London Mosque recently, wasn't there?
I spoke at least at 10 mosques.
Oh, wow, you did. Well done. Well done, you. What about the rest of them?
Asghar, can you listen for a second?
Yes,
I know, for example, hundreds of mosques are up and down the country
give me
have
a
open
break.
day on
Stop
a
lying.
regular basis.
Stop lying.
There are problems with mosques, we agree, that to do with management, to do with resources. We need to change that, I agree.
Stop giving excuses.
Asghar, will you allow me to make my point? And then you can make yours in a minute, okay? So mosques up and down the country,
I'll decide that.
the 3,000 of them, of course, the 3,000 of them, we need to change the way they're managing, the way they're reaching out, I agree. But there is an issue here, and that is, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when the 9/11 incident happened and July 7 incident happened, the mosques may have been closer in the sense of their attitude. 10 years on, I believe there has been a seismic shift, and the shift is they're doing more open days, they're doing more discussions, they're hosting more programs, and I know, so far until today, I lead President for mosques, and they've never said no to me. They've never said no.
One second, I did promise to go to Mo, and I'm aware of our time constraints. And Mohammed, you've debated with Tommy Robinson, you've debated with Anjem Chaudhry. You mentioned Anjem Chaudhry because his group, of course, have been associated with many people over the years who have fallen foul of the criminal justice system, including, it is alleged, at least one of the suspects in the Woolwich atrocity. Do you think it's good to debate with these people? Do you think it's good to shine the light on them?
I think it's absolutely vital. I think in Britain, in an open democratic society, sunlight often is the best disinfectant. However, I'm not sure that in the days that have followed the sickening attack in Woolwich, it's been a great platform to give radical extremists who don't reflect either the vast and overwhelming majority of Muslim, Christian, British sentiment, I don't think it's been right to give a platform to people like Anjem Choudary, because that doesn't reflect where we are. I think in this debate, we need, I think, more light than heat. I think we have to address the issues clearly and in a measured way. Firstly, the government has failed in its responsibility to consult and to listen to what Muslims on the street, at the grassroots level, MCB, Islamic Society of Britain, MPACUK, other organisations across the country, have a really good feel. They have their finger on the pulse in terms of how do we address grievances, how do we undermine that extremist narrative, how do we go about getting the communications right, how do we do these things that the previous government in Prevent did really well, and the government hasn't listened.
Undermining the extremist narrative, you can't, you know, clamp down on somebody having a particular worldview, can you?
No, you can't. But if the interesting thing is, if the complaint from people like Tommy Robinson in the English Defence League, and also mosques and imams and Muslims across the country is, we don't have a good enough basis for authentic Islamic teaching and education for our children here, well, the answer is better education. The answer isn't no education or less education. Now, the government has seen fit to cut funding going into communities, going into organisations like this. For example, if you lived in Finland and your kids were at school and you said, we've recently arrived in the country, we could do with some support for the Muslim children who are here, the state says, great, well, we'll sort out some Islamic teachers for you, some Islamic studies programmes. We'll help teach you Arabic, we'll help teach you good, authentic Islamic studies. Now, we don't really have that system of education in this country at the minute, and it allows these young people to become radicalised. Clearly, we have to recognise there's a problem around language. Clearly, we have to recognise that there is a problem around allowing individuals to become radicalised. But I think Sir Malcolm Rifkind made a point this week, and I hope it's something that David Cameron's going to pay attention to. He said he wants to lead a new task force to look at addressing extremism in this country.
But where is it
I'll just finish it. But Malcolm, one second. But Malcolm Rifkind,
this narrative of yours, I mean, where does the radicalism extremism come from? Where does it come? It comes from the Wahhabis, it comes from the Salafis, it comes from Ikhwan, it comes from the Deobandi, all of these extremist groups. This is ideology that's seeping through the mosque.
Just respond to that, Lloyd, then I want to speak to Stephen Williams. Wait, quick response.
That would be really convenient if that was the case. But Sir Malcolm Rifkind has made clear this week that our secret intelligence services, MI5 and MI6, have some questions to answer about their efforts to radicalise. Now, we know that Al-Muhajirun, this organisation that one of the alleged killers has been connected with, and Anjem Choudary, we know that there was somebody who came from Danish intelligence, I think his name was Morten Storm. He's come out in the press recently to give a statement to say that he's been working with CIA.
Much of that will emerge. That may well emerge. Stephen Williams, have the government failed here, or previous governments failed here, as you know, as a Lib Dem who's part of the coalition?
Well, I don't think government funding for teaching of Islam would make much of a difference, but I think teaching about Islam is absolutely essential in all of our schools so people understand the multicultural society that we live in. Where I think government funding could make a big difference, that is about more integration. For instance, teaching of English for people for whom it is a second language, and that perhaps has been cut in some places, and I do think that's a mistake, particularly for women. What I find when I speak, my constituency in Bristol is one of the most cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic constituencies in the country, but quite often women who come to my surgery quite clearly can't speak English, even though they've been living here for 20 years. So I think that is a big duty on government, to make sure that everyone can speak English, because that is the most basic requirement for integration and feeling British. And it might, because
we might not have picked that up on the microphone. You're saying not speaking English doesn't cause terrorism.
Because empowering women can make a big difference everywhere in the world.
That does not cause terrorism. The terrorists spoke English. They were English. They were born here and they were raised as non-Muslims. Allow me to finish. The reason why the government funding and all these initiatives will fail is because they can't admit and thus cannot fund the fact that the root cause of this is foreign policy. Teach democratic values, but that means that you have to admit it's a foreign policy issue.
Richard, do you want to come in here?
Well, I mean, what's troubling here, I think, is that the problem of alienated young immigrants, men, is a problem in itself. When they latch on to a version of religion which is doubly legitimizes their alienation, you've got a perfect storm. And I don't, in a way, see that it's clear yet that respectable majority of Islam could get awfully nice and awfully integrated and democratic. Actually, that might make, if this alienation is of a particular character, might make these young people even more prone to listen to alienation. Because one of the things, sorry, I just want to say, one of the things they're alienated from is their own people and their own majority religion.
You see, they're kicking against it, yes. Amra.
What I would like to say, as a mother myself, for our children, we have almost torn our hair out trying to find a place where they could get the best of both worlds, and good academic education as well as Islamic teaching. And it's been so hard to find those. And a lot of those parents who had been in my position set up Muslim schools. And not a single person who's committed any extremist act has come out of those schools, because there's a framework of Islamic education. A lot of these young people who come from backgrounds where there's gang culture, there's many of those who are absolutely British and not immigrants, who have been born here, brought up here, but disaffected young men who do not have anywhere to go and learn education. I just want to add that the Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him,
many converts, though.
Prophet Muhammad came to you know, the culture of the tribes. You kill one of ours, we'll kill one of yours. He came to stop that. He came to create a law and order among people, and he was invited to do so.
So therefrom is a question I want to ask the Imam, if I can, Ajman Masroor, because, you know, you can take lines out of many holy scriptures and take them out of context. So say if a young man came to you who felt alienated and said, it says in the Quran, fight and slay the infidels wherever you find them, and then quotes, I will instill terror into the hearts of the unbelievers, smite ye above their necks and smite all their fingertips off them. And he says that means that I can fight the enemy here on the streets. What would you say to him?
There are a lot of people who misunderstand, misread and misquote the Quran, often because they don't understand the language itself, they don't understand the context in which it was revealed, and they don't understand how it should be applied. And it's only because of the misunderstanding. Here is a verse of the Quran that let's also put in the context. God is saying, if you kill one person, innocent person, it is like taking the lives of the entire humanity.
But then he will say to you, what is an innocent person?
Hold on a second. Yeah, but the Quran defines it so very clearly. Anyone who is guilty of a crime should be tried in a due process. The verse of the Quran continues. Another verse in the same passage, it says, if you save one life, it is like saving the lives of the whole of humanity. There is a misunderstanding.
Okay, I'm him, and I say to you, and I'm questioning, and I say to you, but if he's a soldier, he's not an innocent person. What do you say to him?
Here, there is what I'm saying. Quran says very categorically, Islam has got 5 primary purposes. One is to protect life. The other is to protect intellect, property, faith, and honor of people. If these people are talking about protecting people's lives and their honor, their property, then they're talking Islamic. But if they're not, then they're talking un-Islamic. Islamic framework is very simple and important, which is a personal peace within and personal peace with the society around you. And if you're at war with people, if you're constantly squabbling, if you're constantly threatening, when Prophet Muhammad would walk the street, Asghar,
that's why this theology,
Asghar, can I finish? Asghar, please.
Argument will not work.
Asghar, can you please allow me to finish?
You've hit the nail on the head. They will have a counter for whatever he said. They will have another counter.
Asghar, can I finish my sentence?
The only way to say it is, you're right,
Asghar, let me finish my sentence.
Democratic way of fighting.
Prophet Muhammad, when he would walk the street, the non-Muslims around would say the trustworthy and the trusted person is walking. Unfortunately, the image that we have created is based on misunderstanding of Islam. And what we are trying to do is...
Where does this misunderstanding come from? It comes from the Wahhabis, it comes from the Salafis, it comes from these extremist sectarians, and we have...
It doesn't help you screaming like that, does it?
We are echo chambers of Wahhabi Islam.
I'm afraid we must leave this particular one, but listen, peace be upon you.
Thank you.
Especially you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much for taking part in that.